Welcome to Take Two with Freddy, real talk about second chances, real life, and the power of rewriting your story. I'm Freddy Freundlich, entrepreneur, mentor, and storyteller. And here's the deal. If I didn't walk it, I don't talk it. Each week, we spend a little time together, laughing, reflecting, and hopefully walking away a little more aware, a little more grounded, and maybe even a little more in control of what really matters. So what's on my mind today? A question that has honestly followed me around for years. Do I want to be right or do I want to be rich? And before everybody jumps right into the money aspect of that, because that's what we tend to do, I'm not just talking about money. I'm talking about richness in every form. Rich in peace and love, opportunities, friendship, self-respect. Rich in freedom and emotional stability and experiences. And I could go on, but I think you guys get the point. Because if you really think about it, some of the wealthiest people financially are completely bankrupt emotionally. And then again, some people with very little money are incredibly rich human beings. So when I ask the question, do I want to be right or do I want to be rich? What I'm really asking is, what am I prioritizing at this moment? Is it my ego or my outcome? And trust me, folks, this is not a lecture. This is a confession. Because there have been many times in my life where I really needed to be right. Not wanted to be, needed. I had to prove my point. I had to defend my position. I had to win that argument. I had to make a point. I had to show people that they underestimated me. I had to make sure that the jury in my head declared me innocent and found them guilty, whoever happened to be them at the time. And perhaps many of you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. You find that you'll walk away from a conversation technically correct, but somehow you're feeling worse. You may win the argument, and yet you've lost a relationship. You prove your point, but lost the opportunity. One of the things I found most expensive over the years is protecting my pride while sacrificing my peace and serenity. I'll share with you guys, sometimes the price of being right is much higher than we realize. Now, let me be clear. I absolutely believe there are moments when being right matters. There are principles, there are red lines. There are moments when integrity costs something. And you will pay it willingly because your soul matters more than convenience. I'm not talking about becoming weak, fake, or selling out. I'm talking about knowing the difference between protecting your values and protecting your ego, because those are not the same thing. And I've learned it the hard way. You know, when you're younger, especially if you've had to fight your way through life, whether it's emotionally, mentally, or professionally, being right may become part of your identity. Especially for people who spent years feeling unseen or misunderstood. You start thinking, one day they'll realize I was right. And maybe they do. I can honestly tell you that I said things 30 years ago that people completely disagreed with me at the time. And now many of those same people come back and say, hey, you were absolutely right. You knew what you were talking about. But the truth is, sometimes it isn't really worth it. Because, how much did it really cost me in waiting for that validation? Sleepless nights, damaged relationships, stress, resentment. And maybe the bigger question is, why do we need that validation so badly in the first place? I know that one probably hurts a little. It certainly hurts me when I think about it. Because I'm thinking that maybe sometimes being right is tied to wounds that we have that never fully healed. Sometimes we argue because we want acknowledgement. Sometimes we're holding on to anger because we want justice. Sometimes we replay the same story over and over because we have some sort of a need for someone to finally tell us, hey, you were right and I was wrong. But as we know, life doesn't always give us that moment. And if your peace depends on that moment arriving, you may wait a very long time. I'll give you guys a real example. A few years ago, I was invited onto a very well-known, popular business podcast. Big opportunity for me. They had a big audience. And honestly, I was excited about it because I thought it would be a chance to share some of my unconventional ideas about sales and communication and human behavior. Now, the host was a very smart guy, but he was very, what I call, in the box. Everything had a structure, a formula, a system. And for those of you who know me, I've never fit in any box. Okay, that's not who I am. So during the conversation, we started talking about various sales approaches. And I shared some things that completely contradicted the traditional way many people are taught to sell. But as always, I wasn't speaking theoretically. I was speaking from personal experience. I was talking about things I had personally lived and tested and sometimes even failed at, obviously succeeded, but in other words, real world experience. And the more I tried explaining it, the more resistance I got from him. At first, it was becoming a debate. Then it started becoming an argument. And I could feel myself digging in deeper and deeper because in my mind, I kept thinking, but I know this works. I've lived this. I am right. The problem was that at a certain point, I stopped trying to communicate and I started trying to prove it. And there's a difference because then the energy changed. Instead of listening to each other, we were just defending our own positions. Eventually, he stopped the conversation completely. He basically cut the interview short and said he didn't want to continue down that road. And I remember sitting there afterward frustrated because to this day, I still believe I was right. But here's the uncomfortable part. Even if I was right, did I handle it the right way? I guess that's the question, because maybe there was a better way for me to communicate. Maybe I could have left more room instead of trying so hard to convince him. Maybe protecting that opportunity would have been more valuable than winning the argument. But then again, maybe standing my ground mattered. Honestly, I don't know. I still don't know. And that's exactly why this topic is so complicated, because life is not always black and white. Sometimes being right costs you something. Sometimes compromising costs you something. The wisdom is trying to figure out which price is worth paying. I can remember many situations, especially in business, obviously not always, but especially in business where I absolutely knew I was right. Absolutely. And I probably was. But instead of asking myself, where's my upside? What's the best outcome here? I was too busy thinking, how do I prove my point? And that's a big difference because one question builds the future, the other feeds the ego. And I can tell you guys, ego can be very expensive. You know, it's funny, we talk a lot about financial investments, stocks and real estate, crypto, other stuff, but we rarely talk about emotional investments. Where are you investing your emotional energy? I find that some people are emotionally overinvested in proving themselves, and the return on that investment is usually terrible. You spend years trying to convince people who already made up their minds about you, while somebody else is spending that same time building a life. I have to tell you, that's probably one of the hardest lessons I've had to learn. Not every misunderstanding needs correction. Not every accusation needs to be defended. And not every disagreement requires a courtroom trial. Sometimes the richest move is silence. Not weakness, silence. Because there's a difference. Weakness is about fear. Silence can be wisdom. One of the things I've learned as I've got older is that peace and serenity have tremendous value. Now, I have to say, younger Freddy didn't really understand that. Younger Freddy thought intensity was power. Now I think calmness is power. Being able to walk away from unnecessary conflict, that's power. Being able to let someone have the last word because the relationship matters more than your ego, believe me, that's power. In fact, being able to say, maybe I don't need to win this one, that's not just power, it's maturity. Now, let me flip this around for a second because I don't want any one of you guys to misunderstand me. There are times when choosing richness over right becomes dangerous. If you compromise your integrity for approval, money, status, eventually you will pay for it. You can't abandon yourself just to avoid conflict. That's not richness. That's emptiness disguised as success. And we are seeing it everywhere. People staying in toxic situations because they don't want to rock the boat. People who are tolerating disrespect because they're afraid to lose access to the money or the validation. There are people who are becoming versions of themselves they don't even recognize anymore. And unfortunately, we're seeing more and more of this, especially in this new world of social media. Now, this is a complicated question, and I don't think there's necessarily a universal answer because every situation asks something different from us. Sometimes life says, stand your ground. And sometimes life says, just let it go. Wisdom is knowing which moment you're in. And honestly, for me personally, I know I get it wrong sometimes. I've definitely held on to arguments for too long. I've stayed angry for too long. I've replayed conversations in my head like they're a Netflix series nobody asked for. And I think there's probably many of you listening right now who know exactly what I mean. You're in the shower arguing with somebody who's not even there, trying to come up with a better comeback 3 days later. Meanwhile, that same person, that other person, is eating lunch, living their life, and you're emotionally shadowboxing in your bathroom. And it always amazes me how suddenly we become world-class attorneys 5 hours after the argument is over. We laugh because it's true. But think about how much of our life energy gets burned that way. That energy could have gone into building something, healing something, creating something, or loving someone. Instead, we spend it defending our mental position. And look, I think part of growth is realizing that life is not a courtroom. Not everyone needs a nice, neat verdict. Sometimes two people simply experience the same situation differently. Sometimes nobody is fully right. And unfortunately, sometimes both people end up getting hurt. And maybe at the end of the day, that need to be right is actually the thing that's keeping us stuck. One of the things that I've learned is people who are truly secure with themselves usually don't need to consistently prove they're right. That consistent need for proving energy often comes from insecurity. And I say that with all my love because I've lived it. When you know who you are, you stop needing every room to validate you. You stop turning disagreements into identity crises. You stop needing universal approval. And that, my friends, is, I believe, true freedom. And freedom is a major, major component of wealth. You know what else is wealth? Having a good night's sleep, a clear conscience, a healthy relationship with those around you, whether it's your kids, your partner, your friends. Being able to look in the mirror and be real with yourself, that to me is wealth. And sometimes, as crazy as it sounds, we sacrifice all of this just to win arguments nobody will remember 6 months down the road. So maybe the real question isn't, do I want to be right or rich? Maybe the better question is, what kind of rich am I trying to become? Because if becoming rich costs you your soul, your integrity, your humanity, the math simply doesn't work. My God, man, what is more important to you than your own peace of mind? And if being right isolates you from that, probably it's time to recalculate that formula. Self-awareness matters, balance matters, and most importantly, honesty matters. And when I talk about being honest, it's being honest enough to ask yourself, am I fighting for a principle or am I fighting for my ego? Because that question alone can change relationships, whether they're personal or business. You know, I've said this before on this podcast. Awareness changes everything. Once you become aware of your patterns, you start catching yourself in real time. You start hearing yourself differently. You start pausing before reacting. And that pause, that little space between emotion and response, that's where growth lives. We talked about this a few episodes ago. We're not talking about being perfect. We're talking about growing because none of us get it right all the time. I still catch myself wanting to prove my point. I still catch myself replaying conversations. Sometimes I even find myself emotionally, I'm drafting closing arguments. But the difference is now I notice it faster. And sometimes I literally stop and ask myself, Freddy, what's the upside? What's the goal here? And that's when I ask myself the question, do I want to be happy or do I want to win? Do I want to connect or do I want to dominate? Am I interested in growth or just trying to protect my ego? And depending on that answer, I will move differently. And I really do believe that's what maturity is really about. Not age, maturity. Age comes whether we ask for it or not. Every day we grow older. That part is out of our hands. But maturity, we have more control over that. And let's be honest, there are plenty of older people still fighting every battle like it's a world championship. And there are younger people with incredible emotional wisdom. So let me leave you with something to think about this week. The next time you find yourself in some sort of a conflict, before reacting, ask yourself, what am I truly trying to protect right now? Is it my values, my peace? Or is it my ego, my fear, my image? And then ask yourself one more thing. What would the richest version of me do? Not necessarily the richest financially, but emotionally, spiritually, mentally. Because maybe true wealth is learning which battles deserve your soul and which ones simply deserve your silence. And maybe having that take two doesn't always mean changing the world around you. Maybe it simply means changing the way you respond to it. So that's it. That's today's episode of Take Two with Freddy. And if something in this conversation hit home, if you saw yourself somewhere in it, that's great. That means this was a worthwhile investment of your time. Thanks again for spending your time with me on Take Two with Freddy. And remember, you don't always need to win that argument to win your life. If I didn't walk it, I don't talk it. Please share, like, and subscribe. Until next time, I'm Freddy.